I think we all have to confirm that it's okay. So I have Code for Couples, and Code for Couples was birthed out of seeing kind of the spillover from law enforcement and law enforcement mental health and relationships. And so I started kind of digging in there, doing podcasts, and that's where I started the podcast. And I did some stuff just kind of like, just kind of jumped out and did it. I speak for mental health side, and then I also speak for departments and first responders, EMS now as well. Yes, I have a book that I decided to write because not enough was going on in 2020. So I decided to write a book in 2020. And then I have a curriculum as well that I wrote. So I kind of have a bunch of different things, but I know we're going to talk about speaking tonight.
Yes, talking, but I mean, I know it's all going to blend, and
it does.
We'll carry it over to tomorrow. So if you haven't registered for tomorrow, we'll have a QR code for that later. But yeah, we're basically just building on because we haven't done this before. So we're going to see where it takes us. So we are recording. So those of you who don't like that, just feel free to turn your cameras off. That's okay. I'm going to keep mine on. So Cyndi, you can see my face. I'm going to do all the nodding and
I appreciate that.
All right. So I have some questions for you, front loaded. But again, this is really casual. If you guys have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'll stop Cyndi and we'll ask. How did you get started as a paid speaker?
It's a journey. I will say that. So part of the journey is definitely I kind of have I'll tell you a little bit quickly about the journey. So the journey was when I worked for a nonprofit organization, I was always tapped to present. And so presenting was a part of what I did. I was a facilitator for our programs. I worked with low income adults and youth, and just presenting was a part of it. And so it was kind of already there. When I joined Texas Counseling Association, I just thought, oh, well, that's what you do is you present, because I didn't know any better. And so I started presenting there, and that's kind of a little bit of how I started. And then I quit for a while because I got into private practice and I felt like I didn't know all the things that I needed to know. And then I just started seeing a gap, and I started seeing like, oh, well, gosh, I think I know something about that, or I know more about that, or I thought I could give it a different angle. One of my, I'm going to say, fun presentations that I do that I get paid for is about showing up authentically in the therapy room and the ethics about doing it ethically well is kind of what I would say. So so that's kind of how I started booking. People started to kind of know my style. They knew that I was engaging and that I included my audience in that. And so people started to kind of hear that I was doing presentations and get used to it. And so there were several free presentations that I did along the way. A lot of chapters I presented at with TCA. I presented at community colleges sometimes for free. Library. So you joked about the library, but I did present at a library along the way. And so some of it I learned along the way that, oh, I don't know that I want to keep doing this on my free time. And so I started thinking, okay, what's my time worth? If I'm going to give up some of my time, what is it worth? What would I be making in the therapy room? And I started small. I started small by just saying, hey, you know what? I now charge, in my head, I charged my rate. So, I think at the time I was charging $125 an hour in the therapy room. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to do a 2-hour presentation, I'm going to charge $250 and just see if they bite, because I started to feel resentful for presenting for free. So that's kind of how it blossomed and rolled. Was just, I just started presenting and people started to get to know me a little bit. And I mean, I can go into further detail, but I know you have some questions, so I'm going to let you ask the questions.
Well, one of the things I've talked to you about, because I will read so many things about how to do this, how to do that. And there always seems to be this missing link, right? Okay, I was doing this, and then all of a sudden I got booked for a keynote, because you've given keynotes before.
Yes,
and those
many.
are tremendously profitable. And so take us on the journey a little bit about how tell us a little bit more about the paid piece, because I want everyone to hear kind of this idea of adding more isn't supposed to lead to more stress or more, more balls in the air, right? If it doesn't add income, you're not working for free. You're not working for, just kudos and thank yous, right? So talk to us a little bit more about that first paid speech and then where you took it from there.
The first paid speeches were more of the CE presentations where somebody wanted to book me to come. I think it was even Lubbock was the first time they saw me present at TCA as far as a ethical presentation. And they were like, hey, can you do a 3-hour presentation? I said, absolutely. Because I just say yes. Right. And then I figure out what I'm going to do. And so I said, absolutely. And I said, I can work up what I would charge for that. And they said, okay. And I just, sometimes I hate to say it, like I think kind of the mystique or the mystery around us working outside of the therapy room has to be like, what do we charge? And I think that's the biggest, I mean, for me, it's still sometimes of like, do I up my rate more? Like, what do I do here? And so sometimes that can be really difficult. And so I think Lubbock was probably the first one that I got paid to speak at. It was a 3-hour situation. And then I started just becoming more confident in that. I think a second part is having signature presentations that you do. So I have a couple of signature presentations that I give for mental health, or for our community. And so because of that, I always say like they're in the can. Like, I don't know why. I don't even know where that comes from. A film? I don't know. But they're presentations that I've done. They're presentations, and honestly, I'll go try them out. And I keep saying TCA, it's just to me, it's not easy, but it's one of those platforms. Like if you can find a platform of other professionals that can give you feedback and you get good feedback, it can help you kind of narrow down what works, what doesn't work. And so you tweak that presentation until it becomes a part of you, until you know it inside and out, like it lives and breathes almost. And so I have a couple of signature presentations for mental health. And then I have my presentations that I do for first responders and law enforcement, which is kind of a little bit of a different bird. Once again, I have signature presentations that I do. I don't know if that answers the question, but we're looking at like the paid part of it comes from building, really. You have to have those building blocks. And once you get those building blocks, people get to know who you are. And I wound up, I'll give you a good example, is that I presented free we have an organization in town called Backing the Blue Denton. And they are a lot of spouses and other people that support the law enforcement. And so they do a mental health conference. So I presented there for free, but in that audience, I had somebody that came up later and said, hey, I'd like you to present and this is Denton County 911. So now I have a regular speaking gig with the telecommunication dispatchers group. And so I do an 8-hour presentation for them that I do 2 or 3 times a year about mental health and how to take care of themselves. So.
No, and you're doing you're saying exactly what I hoped you would, because you're talking about the difference between giving a speech or giving a presentation, right? Because, hey, oh, you need a speaker? I'm there. I mean, that's kind of a gig, right? I'll talk about whatever you want me to talk about.
Right.
Versus a paid speaker, you have these canned speeches in the can. They're not canned speeches. They're in the can. They're ready to go.
Ready to go. Yes.
And those are things you can feature on a website. They are things you can feature on Instagram or however you advertise
Market,
your stuff.
LinkedIn.
Right.
Mhm.
And LinkedIn was a big piece for you, right?
Yes, actually, LinkedIn is a great networking tool for me, mostly because the people that are going to most of the time pay, they're looking for somebody, they're looking to somebody that they can bring into their organization, because organizations have more money, right? Everybody needs to understand that organizations have more money. So that they're looking for people to come in. They're looking for people to impact their workplace of some kind. And so if you're going to a workplace, those kinds of presentations work well. I also want to really quickly, let me also say, like, there's different types of presentations. And I think it's really important that you understand that you may not like all types of presentations. You you may like to go in and do a 1 to 2 hour presentation where you just talk and you give information. Then there's the idea of like, do you want to do a half day? That's going to be more of a workshop. Are you going to do an 8 hour, 6 hour, 8 hour? That's going to be a workshop. So you can go and present, but then thinking about how you want to build that out. So I actually have a signature. I call it a keynote because it's like an hour presentation or an hour and a half presentation. I have both. And so when I give that, that's my public speaking. I'm standing up and I have given that in front of 40 people, and I've given it in front of 250 people. And I get paid differently depending upon my audience because I charge differently. And so when I give that presentation, it's a presentation, but I can also build it out to a 3-hour workshop. I can build it out to a 6-hour or 8-hour workshop. So some of that is unpacking the material that you have. So if somebody likes something, then you can actually take that and unpack it and build it out to something else. They're like, oh, I'm going to pick on somebody. I liked Allison's or is it Taya? I guess I'm going to say that. Taya's presentation. She was awesome. Hey, can I get more of that? And can you do a 6-hour one? And the answer is going to be yes. You don't hesitate. You just say yes. And then you figure out what you're going to do. And you're like, how can I impact this more? What can I include? How do I do this differently? Keynotes are going to be more of like, I'm on stage, I'm doing a presentation in front of a large group. The largest group I've ever done was TCA, where I did 2,100 people. And I'm doing there's really no interaction with a keynote. I personally have some thoughts on how to do a keynote. But it's important to know, like, what are you comfortable with? What size audience are you comfortable with? Do you want engagement? It's really hard to get engagement when you have 150 people in a room. You can do it, but it's really difficult. And doing 2020 was really interesting, 2020, 2021, because I learned how to give a presentation in a vacuum where I'm just presenting on a screen and I don't see faces. Like, I might have a little chat going on here. And so really understanding, what do you need and what are you good with? What's your, I have to say, like, what's your jam? But like, what kind of excites you? Because if you're doing speaking should be something that gives you energy, because that energy has to be returned to your audience. And so if you're speaking and you're engaging, it's hard to stay engaged for 4 hours, for 6 hours, for 8 hours, but you can do it. But you're going to need a day off afterwards, and that has to be planned in.
All right. So I'm going to, the thing about becoming a paid speaker, I'm going to talk about something you told me two really great nuggets of information. One was when you were asked to build a curriculum, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, tomorrow. But you were told, hey, don't build it till somebody asks for it, number one.
Right.
But number two, one of your big tenets of how you help people do this is research. And I remember when I looked at your stuff and I'm like, research, yeah, I don't want, but then you said you in your research, you found out that law enforcement officers who had great families or family life were safer on the job. And that became a pain point and a marketing point for your talks, right? So talk a little bit about how your research has informed this.
So I'm one of those weird people. I think, I have a lot of books and I look at it, but I know you and I were kind of talking a little bit about this last week where I was like, all that research you had to do when you were in grad school, and they were like, you've got to go and you've got to do these articles, or when you were writing a paper, you always had to back it up with research. And what we do, and one of the reasons I get picked up for conferences a lot is because I use relevant peer-based reviewed material to back up what I am saying. So a lot of times I may, in my 20 plus years of being a clinician, I may be like, oh, this feels like the answer. And that's great, but I'm kind of just pulling it out like here, right? So it's important to back up your opinion, because otherwise it's just your opinion, and you don't teach people your opinions, you teach people facts. So so I read some peer-reviewed material. I try to read, if you're interested in impacting a specific niche or like a community or a cause, go read articles outside of mental health. Go read articles that are from them, or like if you're interested in impacting a community, what can you figure out about that community? What's the research about that community? If it's cancer or whatever, right? If it's a cause that you're going to get behind, if it's about, there's a lot of causes, I won't go into those, but there's a lot of causes that people can get behind. And because we have a mental health angle, we can kind of put things together in a different way for a community. And so having those pain points and knowing that research, we can look at it. So one of the pain point that you're talking about, I have a couple of different ones that I've gotten. One, I read an article and it was talking about compassion fatigue and compassion satisfaction. And I read that article and it was talking about law enforcement struggles with compassion satisfaction, which is feeling like they make a difference on their job, and compassion fatigue, which is they lack empathy. They struggle with giving empathy. And so it's like, okay, well, if this is a problem and we want to have healthier officers, to have healthier communities, then how do we do that? And so circling back around, I found another article that said officers that have stable and happy home lives are safer and make better decisions on the job. Let's put all that together. I call it my Boggle box. I don't know if y'all ever played Boggle. Okay, like you shake it up and you roll it out and you see what comes out, or Yahtzee, I guess you could do that. And it's like, okay, how can I put this together where I can make statements that are going to be impactful? So one of my statements that I have in my signature presentation is going right through that. And then I tell them, hey, this is why you need to listen. So it gives people hook points. It's not just Cyndi's idea. I'm telling you what the research says. And people are like, huh? Because, and you have to back it up, right? But I always think like, people use that to prove their points, and they'll say, well, research says, and I'm always the person that's like, but does it? Let's go in there and really find it out. So ACA sent something out last week, and it said, the research shows that there's been 200 mass shootings in this year. And I'm like, really? And so I go digging in, and I found the articles, right? So now I can use that and say, hey, here's the sources, and here's maybe some things to consider when we are looking at that. What do we need to think about? What's the cause? Is it empathy? So people listen when they hear that you are backed up by research-based information, because it's validity. It provides validation to what you're going to say. And I think that marrying of, hey, here's the research, And I'm going to tell you what you can do. I always go behaviors and beliefs is what I focus on. And so I'm going to tell you how you can do that. And then this is going to be the impact on your community. This is going to be the impact on your workplace. You have to tie it back to them. I realize I could talk about this a lot. Okay.
Good.
I'll stop there.
That's good, because we're going to talk about this, because I know when we finish, you're going to think of stuff. And then tomorrow, we'll be talking about so many things: podcasting, blogging, walk talk therapy, yoga therapy, anything that is just different that people want to bring into or out of the therapy room. So what you're saying, though, you're talking about pain points. And so for those folks who don't really get where you're headed here, this is important for marketing too, because if you're going to have a side hustle, you need to market your side hustle, right? Because how are people going to find you if they're not in your audience, right? How are you going to find them to show them how magnificent you are, right? So talk about how you market your speaking side with pain points.
So so when I market my speaking side, I'm pretty much marketing that all the time. So there's always let me step off and go to the right here, because I was going to say something and then I'm going to say something else. When people find me, so they find me through content, I talk about pain points and solutions. That's what I do in my content primarily. So pain point solutions. And I do that on 3 platforms. I do that on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. 9 times out of 10, probably 99% out of 100, my gigs, my speaking stuff comes from LinkedIn. Now, some of my mental health community, people that know me or don't know me, they might find me on Facebook or Instagram. I have a couple of people, but primarily those are individuals and not companies or agencies that are looking to hire. So I share those on LinkedIn, and that's part of where I find that, or where people find me. Embarrassingly, what I have found out, and this is good for everybody, I think, is that people contact me and they're like, yes, I've read your content. I was looking at it. Somebody told me about you, those kinds of things. You put a lot of good content out there. And then I found your YouTube channel. Let me tell you something, folks. I have not put up a YouTube in probably 2 or 3 years, which tells me I need to keep that active. So first of all, YouTube is, I call it Googleable. Like YouTube and Google are friends. And so you could put those keyword searches in there to come up. But I was shocked. But if you think about it, if somebody's going to come speak, you want to see, how do they interact? How do they engage? How do they, what are they like on a video screen as far as the way they're speaking? Are they animated? Do they come across polished? Right? So part of that is, I didn't realize that my YouTube videos, which are my podcasts that I videoed, by the way, they become my interview in a way. And so I think it's content and coming up with different content. But back to your question a little bit, in the sense of people connect to pain points. So if I am struggling, if I take law enforcement mental health, which is a big platform right now, law enforcement mental health, there's some big things like PTSD and trauma, but then there's other aspects of burnout and employment struggles. And so knowing those pain points in that community is really important. With mental health, I think what some of our pain points right now is fatigue and being tired and burnout, or, just being overwhelmed still, and doing this on a video screen all the time, which I think takes more energy, which is anecdotal. And I have not found the research yet, but I'm going to. So part of it is just knowing the pain points, connecting. I think it's important to connect, and then providing solutions. So it's not just about the solution. You've got to, I'm going to use this word, and I hope people don't see it as a dirty word. You have to emotionally hook your audience. And so emotionally hooking your audience is one way. Research is another way to hook them, because you have to give them a reason to want to hear what you have to say. Because if you're just saying, hey, here's the top 5 things you need to know, it doesn't necessarily engage them. You have to speak to their emotion and get them to engage in some way.
All right, we've got a question. Carolyn says, hello, Cyndi. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. Do you put snapshots on YouTube and LinkedIn or entire presentations?
So on YouTube, I just have the whole entire thing. So when I'm talking about, so what I have on there right now is I have my podcasts. So it's not like my presentation. If it was my presentation, like I recorded my presentation. So if I videoed my presentation, I have a speaker's reel. And so I have a speaker's reel that has
Whoa, stop. What's a speaker's reel? Hold up.
Okay. So what I had somebody tell me a while back, anytime you need to speak, you need to bring a video camera. And I started videoing myself. I also have a wireless mic, which is called a lavalier, a wireless mic that hooks to my camera. And so my camera, so even though I might be wearing like their mic or having their mic, I hook mine up so it hooks up to my camera. And then I record myself presenting. And I will tell you, some of these videos, like, nobody wants to sit in the front rows. And so it looks like when I spoke at FBI at their conference, the first 5 rows were empty. And so it looks like I'm speaking to an empty audience, but we clipped it where it's like zoomed into me and it's just following me around and not so much the empty chairs. But so I just started gathering videos of me speaking. And I think that's a great thing to do. If you don't have opportunities to speak, I would say gather a group of friends together and present for them, and just create your own videos of you speaking and engaging, because that's part of what sells, and it sells it. So my speaker's reel is like, I think a total of 7 or 8 minutes. And it's got various times of me speaking. So there might be like a 2-minute clip or a 3-minute clip or another little clip. So the little clips of me speaking at various venues. So that's what that is. So what I would say is that I don't know that I'd recommend like if you're giving a presentation, I don't know if I put the whole presentation on YouTube. I think I would do do something that people will watch, and that would be 2 minutes. 2 to 3 minutes is what people watch. Anything over 2 to 3 minutes, they're going to tune out. So if you could give content, 2 to 3 minutes of content, that's what people stick with. And that's what I would say would be great YouTube content or great content to put on LinkedIn. Remember, Instagram, I think you have a minute unless you're going to do like IGTV. Facebook, you have all the time in the world. So it's kind of knowing what platform works and where your people and what platform to use.
Okay. So I'm going to do a quick commercial because we can. So Cyndi and I are going to be hosting a retreat next year in April. We're calling it Get Shit Done. It's a Get Shit Done Day. And that's what Cyndi and I focus on when we have so there are lots of things that we're going to put together. It's going to be in Austin, Texas. Yes, it's going to be a sleepover. So bring your jammies. We will provide meals and all kinds of great stuff. But most of all, we're going to provide a place for you to get shit done. So if you have your phone out and you can grab that QR code, you can get on our wait list. No money required. Just get on the list and we will send you info as we have it. And if you snap that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm going to show you the next QR code, which is if you are interested for tomorrow night, adding blogs, podcasts, and non-traditional modalities to your private practice. There will be some recordings, some pre-recordings of folks that I interviewed who do the things. But Cyndi's coming back and she's going to talk to us about, yes, her amazing Code for Couples podcast, which is just doing amazing things for law enforcement officer, spouses, partnerships. And then on the 7th, it's going to be me. We're going to talk about adding CEs and online courses. So what does that look like? How do you use learning management systems? How do you get paid to put all of this amazing content online? And that's sort of the focus of all of this. I'm going to stop the share and bring us back. Because even our questioner here, right? It's what do you do with the content? How much do you put out there? So I'm going to steer you to your book, right? Because one of the things, again, you and I kind of talk about is that when you give a speech and you don't leave a little piece of you with your audience, that's a real missed opportunity. But also on the flip side, your speeches come out of the chapters of your book, don't they?
Yes. When we're talking about the law enforcement aspect, that is exactly, it was really everything that I was speaking about that I realized I could just put it in a book. Now it's vice versa. So I just pull things out of the book, and it develops the content, and there is aspects I wind up talking more about resiliency in person than I do in my book. So, because many times I'm talking to departments, but yes, it's, that's something that you taught me along the way, which is you kept telling me, Cyndi, the book is the best business card you'll ever have. I'm like, Kate, I will never write a book. And then I wrote a book. I have a couple of pigs flying over here. There people have given those to me. They're like, yeah, when pigs fly, right, Cyndi? And I'm like, shut up. So, it's kind of one of those things. It was, it's a process. I won't get into the book aspect, but yeah, it's just content. And, I could talk a lot about content and what to do with content. I don't know if that would be helpful, but wherever you want to go with it.
Well, let's open it up to questions too. I see wheels turning out there for those of you who have cameras on. We've talked about marketing. We've talked about creating it. One thing we haven't talked about, Cyndi, is just kind of how did you get the skill set, right? Like I know with my voice, I always say with my voice, don't take me to a bar because you won't hear me. I have a very mid-range, kind of a gravelly voice. And as the evening gets longer, I'm going to sound like I smoke 4 packs a day. So when you stand up, you have to project, you have to do all these things, like make sure you're doing things with your hands or not doing things with your hands. How did you just develop the skill set as a speaker?
Flying by the seat of my pants. I mean, part of it is that when I was 5, my mom was like, this girl's driving me nuts. And she put me in drama for like a year. So that's kind of, I think, where I learned to project. I will also say that my father will always say, Cyndi, you don't have to talk so loud. And he said that my whole entire life. My best friend and I would talk on the phone and my mom would be like, oh my gosh, when you and Jennifer get on the phone. So part of that is just, I've always been that way. I've always been a little bit of a ham and a little bit of a performer. I definitely stuffed that for a long time. And so then when I started to present again, part of it was just, I realized part of it was me accepting that it's okay for me to fail. I just kind of, no presentation is going to be the same. No presentation is perfect. I'm going to screw up. One of my presentations that I gave for a very large, I gave a presentation for a very large department in Oklahoma City, and I had a heckler, and he was.
Wait, what did he tell? Dive into that. What happened?
So
was Bobby there?
Yeah, he was there, but
she presents with her husband, BTW. No.
So not most of the time I do not.
Okay.
Most of the time I fly solo and he's in the audience. So sometimes, like when we're presenting to counselors, we present together because everybody likes to hear from him and find out his world, not me. So yeah, I had a heckler in the audience and I was talking about oxytocin and sex. And I was talking about the limerence stage, and I was talking about how the brain likes to be activated. Long story short, I was talking about how oxytocin, that women receive hits of oxytocin different in love than men. I know this. I've done my research. And this guy in the back says, and I said, yes. He's like, you can get oxytocin from petting dogs. And I was like, oh, okay. And in my brain, I'm like, we're talking about sex, not dogs. But it was just like some random. So I will have people like some of the things like, and he would do wait, and he thought he knew more than me. And every single time he would say these things. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. I'll have to read more about that. And I would just keep going on. I was like, good point. Well, anyway, and I just went with it because I can, like, whatever, right? So part of it, I think when we're talking about my style, I think I was just like, you know what? Nothing's going to be perfect. I'm going to flow with it. I'm going to acknowledge the comment and move on. You'll have somebody in your audience who wants to pontificate and share their story or ask you a very personal question. Here's a case. Let me tell you about this case. And can you give me advice on my marriage right now? And I'm like, that's really interesting. I'm wondering if I can meet with you afterwards. So I just kind of learned these ways to kind of sidestep along the way. But nothing's going to be perfect. I think we're our own worst critics, because I'll finish something and people are like, oh, that was great. Or my husband was like, you did fine. You did great. I'm like, I think I could do better. So I'm working on trying to like celebrate me and say like I do a good job. So
I'm helping
there's that
with
kind of thing. I do want to say one thing before I answer some questions too. I think it's really important to, if you can, if it's something that you relate to, incorporate story. People connect to story. And so I think story is always a good way to interweave concepts, whether that's case studies or whether that's you connect to something personally. So story is always good to involve too when you're speaking. Okay, I know there's a couple of questions here.
So we've got one about what platform. Raina wants to know what platform you use for your peer review articles, because that's sometimes hard to get access to if you don't have an affiliation, right?
Yeah, and that can be really expensive, by the way. So primarily I use a website called Academia. I think it's academia.edu. And there are a lot of, I'm saying that I have to I'll look it up if you don't mind, and you can share it later. Is that okay? And there are a lot of free articles out there. The way I found them is I went to Google Scholar. And so if I started on Google Scholar, then it will direct me to journal articles as opposed to like blogs.
Whoa, I've never seen that before. Sorry, I'm unmuted.
No, it's good.
That's crazy. I'm putting it in the chat.
So the other way that this was my backdoor way, is that I'll give you a good example. There was something that I was reading and people kept referencing this one book. And I thought, I guess I got to find the book. And so I went into the book, and then in the book, I started looking at the resources and the references, like what references does this book use? So that was another backdoor way that I used when I would find books that I connect with. So I talk a lot about shame in the therapy room. And so that's one of the things. So I can't remember her first name, but Barstow is a reference that I use a lot, and she has articles and books. And so I go and I look at his. For law enforcement, there's a guy named Papagayo. I think he's Greek. And so I go specifically looking for his newest, latest, and greatest articles, because I know he is currently doing research that is relevant to what I need. So that's kind of the backdoor way that I do it. But Google Scholar is a great way to start.
That's awesome. I did put that in the chat. All right, Jessica wants to know, I have done a lot of speaking and I get requests to speak with mental health orgs, but I have not been able to find opportunities that pay me to speak. Are there other suggestions besides the mental health organizations and conferences? These are both typically unpaid gigs and aren't necessarily going to lead to paid gigs. So I'm curious your advice also on how to get connected with companies and businesses that are more able to pay. Is this best done as a cold call and a pitch it situation?
Okay, there's a lot there. So I'm going to
Good questions.
I'm going to presume that there has been a request for payment before. So sometimes it's that I try to live by a premise of make them tell you no. So it doesn't hurt to ask. Even if it's a little thing like, oh man, I'd really love to do that. I have to take time from the therapy room to do that. Does $350 sound too much for me to come and present? I also get that there are organizations that are just looking for people to do it for free. I totally get that. And I think there are populations that are like, well, I mean, other people will provide it to me. Okay, well, let other people do it for you then. So let me look at the second part of that. So the second part of that, I think, is also, this kind of leads me to one of the things that I really suggest, which is having 3 to 5 key points that you just talk about over and over and over again, because you start to be known for something as opposed to somebody just, hey, I can talk about this. Do I want to talk about it? So you start to position yourself as an expert. And when you start to position yourself as an expert, then that's when people start to pay. And I think that's kind of the key. So yes, you can do a cold call. I think networking is really important. So if you have people on LinkedIn, which is, or wherever, or networking in general, what are some of the places that they're struggling? Cold calling works. So there's a way to pitch. And it is kind of like, hey, this is what I'm here to present on. If you need me, I'm here. I think the direction of being seen as an expert is probably a little bit more successful than just cold call pitching. I would say networking would be second, and then third would be cold call pitching. So the way my mind works, I'm going to say, okay, who are people in your niche that you know, or that somebody else might know, or that you want to know? I did really bold things that I look back now and I go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. So I'll give you one. Ellen Kirschman, who wrote How to Love a Cop, Counseling a Cop, like she's written like the guru books in the early 2000s and 90s. I randomly was in California one day and I hit her up on LinkedIn and I said, I'm in California. Do you want to get together? She said no, but I still did it. So, and then what's weird now is she reached out to me now. I connected with her on LinkedIn and she said, hey, I've been watching you, would love to be on your podcast. And so it's just kind of like, sometimes you just go for it and you try to make a connection. There are people in my community that I think are way above my pay grade, if you know what I mean. And then just because I reached out and talked to them about something or asked them a question, now I'm on their radar. And so I think kind of that's a good way to go as opposed to like just the cold call pitch. Like, use a network, find out who knows who, and do it to form a relationship and just nurture relationships is what I would say. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, she responded.
Oh, thanks, Jessica. Oh,
Right.
we can talk. We can talk about being on my podcast. Yeah.
All right. Tiandra wants to know how you have those payment discussions and how do you set your fees?
So I do a proposal. I put together a proposal. So here's my process. My process is, hey, I'd be interested in you coming to speak. Cool. Let's set up a time to talk. And I set up a time to talk with them. And I spend I always say 15 minutes. I talk way more. So we spend 30 minutes and I spend 30 minutes with them. And I'm like, hey, what are you looking for? What are your pain points? What are you hoping that people will leave with? And I really talk to them. It's like if you're doing a call for a new client, like that's all it is. Like, I want to know, and then I connect with them and I'm like, oh, I get it. Yes. And I tell them what I can give them. And then they're like, I said, well, is this something, does this feel like a good fit? Oh my gosh, absolutely. Okay, cool. I could put together a proposal for you. And then I put together a proposal. Over the years, my prices have just changed. So initially, like I said, I kind of went with how much time am I going to be out of the therapy room? Because the whole point is, right, to kind of, for me at least, was to replace that time, right? So part of things that you have to include and think about is you have to travel. You may be out of the therapy room that day. You have to include travel costs, then speaking. So I recently had somebody that wanted me to come to Washington for 4 hours. And I said, that's fine. The price is still the same if I speak 4 hours or 8 hours because I have to fly out to Washington. So you might as well have me speak for 8 hours because I'm going to be gone. So part of it is thinking about what do you need recovery time? How much time? If I'm doing a virtual presentation, I don't charge hardly anything because I just like hook up my computer and I talk. That doesn't really take me much energy. If I'm doing a presentation, I have to travel around DFW, I'm gone a couple hours. So it really depends upon whatever that is. So I give them a proposal and then I say, if we need to talk about this, let me know. So for example, I'll use my Washington one. They came back, I gave them a proposal and they came back and they were like, whoa, we didn't expect that at all. And I'm like, okay. And then we talked about it. Well, what were you thinking? What's your budget? Because I will do that. Sometimes that's even one of my first questions. Like, if you fill out my speaker form, there's a question on there. Is there a budget for this? And I think that's a really good question to have if you have like a speaker form on your website. That's important. Is there a budget for this? If there's no budget for this, what can we talk about here? So sometimes it's a matter of determining, what's the payoff. Sometimes I speak because I know that I'm going to be getting something else from it. I have an opportunity to sell books, make contacts, get more speaking gigs. So sometimes evaluate that too. But the conversation is really, I start it with, this is my value, and go from there.
So that's a good setup for this next question, because the session rate, the speaking rate, you're really starting to develop you, right? This is the value of you. Like, you're not worth one thing in the therapy room and then another thing at the podium and then another thing in your car when you're driving there or in an airplane. You're worth that all the time, right? So right. The question is, do you price it at the same rate as your session rate, or do you have an hourly speaking rate?
So it depends. I hate to say that. So I don't mind.
Well, because we negotiate. I mean, everything is negotiable, right? So let's put that out there. If you have a rate, everything is negotiable. So
what I have designed over doing this several years now is, because my husband now helps me with booking because I was feeling overwhelmed. And so he's like, you got to come up with some standards. I'm like, okay. So if I have to fly, if I have to be gone a day, we've worked out where it's like, I'm gone for the day and this is what I charge because I'm going to be gone for the whole entire day. And then that also includes and so my rate includes me being out of the office, like flying in, because I don't fly in the day of a speaking engagement because that would be too stressful for me. Can I say damn? Okay. That would be too stressful for me because oh my God, what if the plane is late, right? weather. So I always fly in the day before I speak. If I can fly out that same night, I will, but I'm not going to be back in the therapy room at 9 a.m. doing therapy. So there's 3 days. And so I think about, okay, what is it like for me to be gone 3 days? What does it do to me financially? Because I need to be able to prepare for that. So I have a rate. And then what I do now is if I'm speaking 2 days, it's a little bit cheaper daily because I'm already flying in and stuff. If it's local, or if I'm doing a webinar, I have a half day rate or a full day rate because I'm just driving. And so that's how I do it. And it's not like an hourly thing. If I'm doing something, a morning gig, it's my morning gig. If I'm doing all day, it's an all day. And so I just have those two differences if it's local.
That explains it. All right, I'm going to do another commercial. So again, Cyndi and Kate are going to have a Get Shit Done Day next year, Austin, Texas, in April 2023. And we will do exactly what the title says. We will get shit done. So whether it is your speaking thing, your book thing, your podcast thing, grab the QR code and you will go on a waiting list. No money required yet because it is a sleepover. Bring your jammies. And tomorrow night, we have the Next Steps free conference, adding blogs, podcasts, and non-traditional modalities. And Cyndi will be there. If you're watching this on a replay, hopefully you'll catch that replay as well. And then June 7th, I am by myself talking about adding CEs as an additional stream of income. So Cyndi, I want to be very mindful of your time. So it's getting to the hour. If folks have questions, maybe hang out for a few minutes. Would you mind hanging out for a couple of minutes? And then people who got to go, you got to go. That's great. Yeah. Otherwise, we will open it up to questions or any parting thoughts or just whatever you want to give us.
For me, I would just say I have to give you my website if you want to, if you're interested.
I will type it. Yep.
It's CyndiDoyle.com. It's CYNDI. I do have a free brand new opt-in up there if you want it, where I talk about a lot about like how to put your thing together. So
it's a great opt-in.
I try to give away, I give away information. I think it's helpful. So.
And I just want to freeze frame that. This is what's so cool about you. And I try to do the same thing, but we don't really have that scarcity mindset, right? This is about putting it out there, right? Whether it's on YouTube or on LinkedIn or on your blog or on your podcast. I mean, you can hear Cyndi talk about this stuff in so many places. There will be a point when you have to pay her, but you have a lot of stuff that you give away, right?
And I would say, part of that scarcity mindset too, I'm going to encourage y'all that if there's something and an idea that you have, that just because you see somebody else out there doing it, I want you to resist that idea of that, oh, somebody else is already doing it, so I'm not going to do it. Because you have your own voice, you have your own way of looking at things, you have your own journey, you have your own story. And so there are several people, not many, there are several people that do what I do with Code 4. The thing is that I have a different voice and I have a different breadth of experience than other people. I'm not better than anybody else. I just do it different. And it's what you bring. And especially if you're speaking, authenticity goes so far. You just being real and showing up and being willing to have conversations or have discussions or share information. Lately, people are tagging me to talk about infidelity in law enforcement, and people are like, nobody will talk about this. I'm like, I'll talk about it all day long. What do you want to know? So I really encourage you. And one of my stories really quickly with that is that there is a girl who started the same time I did. She has the biggest blog in law enforcement for law enforcement spouses. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm going to have to compete with her. I reached out to her and we started talking. She's now one of my best friends. And we lift each other up because she does not have a scarcity mindset either. She's like, I don't have a mental health background. You talk about stuff I don't talk about. And I'm like, I don't have kids. You talk about stuff I don't talk about. So I think it's important that when you're moving forward, like, reach out to those people that you think are going to be competition, and maybe see it as like, maybe they can be somebody that you connect with. Maybe you add something and you contribute. So anyway, I just want to encourage you that way.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. I know several of you have to get off the call, and thank you so much for joining. I really, really hope to see you tomorrow evening at our next conference, free conference, Next Steps Work. And if you want to hang out, Cyndi said she'll answer a couple questions. We'll just sit here a minute, see who says stuff. And I will hit pause on the questions so everybody feels a little bit safer. This is a safe space. So hitting pause. Thank you, Cyndi.
Yeah,